Hi and welcome to a session on MDriven Designer. People have asked me to do a sort of a overview of the MDriven Designer. So that's what we're gonna do now. Open up a web browser and Google for MDriven, and you will be taken to the capable object site. And on the build servers or on the downloads, you will find the MDriven Designer Click Once. So Click Once is the distribution technology from Microsoft that sort of updates every time if there's a need. Otherwise, the application lies in your internet cache. So that's a good way to execute the application. So on the build servers, and here we update all the builds daily, but here you find also the MDriven Designer use the Click Once. And for the Click Once to work, you might need, if like I am in Chrome, you might need a Click Once plugin, so that the browser knows what to do with the Click Once extension. And a Click Once plugin is something that you install in the Chrome browser or Firefox or what have you, like this. And once you have it, it will look like this. That it states here that the MDriven Designer, and it's our URL, so it's signed, and then it started with the default or starting model. And here we can do we could do some work with this with the default model, but we might as well start from the beginning. So I'm gonna choose new. And the MDriven Designer is where you could define your model and lots of things regarding your application. And we argue that you could do complete software systems using nothing but modeling, using nothing but MDriven Designer. But that you might not believe, so you will have to follow me to get to that conclusion yourself. Okay, so this is the overview screen, and it shows what diagrams there are. There's only one diagram 1, and this is the repository tree where you also see diagrams. So if I were to add another diagram, a class diagram, it would pop up there as diagram 2, and it would show here as well. And of course, everything I select in the tree, I can also edit my new diagram like this. Nothing to it. So, and then it's updated there. And the things I point at in the tree usually has properties that might be set. So this diagram has the name property here, and that diagram has another name, of course. So I could also change it here, my first, like that, and then it's updated there. Some of these properties are how the diagram should behave. They are not critical, but they will be nice to use if you want that level of control. What we could do is add a category, but we don't have any categories, so we would need to create a category, I guess. add a category. So that's a new category, and that in turn has a property, but only one property, name. So I don't know, one category would be important maybe, and another category that will be less important. And once you have categories, you could set them on diagrams, so then it would be sorted like that. So both these gonna be important like that. And to enter a diagram, you would just double click it, and now we're in the whole diagram. If we would go back, we would be back in the overview. So this is the diagram, my first diagram. You can also switch back to the overview over here like that. And of course you could just click a diagram here to switch it. So my first, if I click on this one, double click on it, it switches to this one. But that isn't easy to see as both diagrams are empty. If I'm on a diagram and I right click, I'm gonna have the menu inside the screen. I could add a class maybe. So class 1. Now this class 1 also ends up in the repository tree here, class 1. This class 1 was actually added to diagram, my new diagram. So if I were to double click on this diagram, it wouldn't be there, but it's here. So it's not here, but it's here. And of course in the overview I can see it's here, but it's not here. Yeah. But it's easy to classes that are created really lives in a package. This is a package, and you could have multiple packages, but it's not necessary to think about multiple packages. Just think of that as a way to section a software system. It's like a unit in or a namespace. Yeah. So the diagram is just a representation of the class. So let's add another class, class 2, and now they are both on the first on that diagram, but they are not on this diagram. Okay, not the problem. We can always add things from the repository to the diagram. Just grab one and drop it there. That doesn't mean it disappears from here. It's just two different representations of the same classes that are in our complete model, in our repository for the model. You can actually add other things to the diagrams as well to get you an overview or to get navigation or help you navigate between things. So this is the first diagram. I'm going to take the other diagram and drag in that. So now I have a little thumb image here of that diagram. So if I go back to the overview, I see that this is how that diagram looks, and that is how that diagram looks. So that's a little bit about diagrams. There are a few types of diagrams, and they are drawn a bit differently. So another type of diagram that is not terribly important but still available is the problem with the menu showing up on the other screen. It's a process definition, or rather a process diagram. That was the one I was looking for. So a process diagram has a different symbol, but other than that, it's really not easy to see that it's a process diagram. Once you have that, you could add let's see if I drag this, yeah, add a process definition. So processes show here. And what's a process then? Yeah, a process is just a workflow, the order you should do things. So maybe this one is, if I double click it, I get this view. And maybe this process should have the name fetching mail. And maybe there are steps involved in this process. So you could create these steps and name them. Go to post office, talk to a go home, like that. So this is more like a documentation of what you have learned in the domain that you're designing for. So once you have that, you could add like a small process diagram here, and you could dress this up with more information as you model further. So that's two types of diagrams, but there's actually one type of diagram that we need to create an attribute on the class to see, and that's the state machine diagram. And that's important. Add a state machine. So once we did that, we immediately jumped into the new state machine. But if we would do the arrow back, we should have ended up here. So we got the new attribute called state, and we see that this attribute is actually a state attribute. Should be seen here. I was a little stumped. It should be okay. So I cut this. What you can do is go into the state diagram this way, show state diagram, and then you're there again. But if you go back, you should get up here, And you also find it here, state, class 1 state. So that's the state diagram. And a state diagram is really what kind of named states that your information can be in. So this could be another way to describe states of your domain. Let's say that this is about fetching the mail. So then it would be, well, it's actually really hard to fantasize name of states when you don't even have the name of the class. So I'm gonna defer that. So as the state attribute isn't shown here, there's one thing that we want to do, and that is to add some small widgets to see that it is a state attribute. I think this should be done automatically actually, but somehow it isn't, so we need to do it manually. On the functions, we have the tag extensions, and the tag extensions show up as a dialog, and we're gonna I'm gonna ensure the default tag extensions, and for this we have the state diagram symbol and the trigger method and the constraint class. So this is the trigger method, and this is what the constraint class looks like. And this is actually just SAML, VPF SAML, so you could add a new symbol easily and patch in some SAML that you would like to view. Once we have done that, we can actually use the extensions for different things. But in our case, if we can make the diagrams redraw, we see that there's a little widget there stating the S, and that's the S for the state diagram. So if I were to zoom in, you can see that's the same S that we have in that other dialog. Okay. So that's a sort of the coverage of the different types of diagrams that are available in MDriven Designer. And everything works the same way as if you point something, it's selected, and you could change some properties here. So you could change the name of the class here to house, or you could stand here and press F2, or you could like softly double click, I guess, to enter edit, and you can edit it here as well. You can move around with the arrow signs, arrow characters, arrow to navigate the model, or you could do it with the mouse, and you can select many to move them in together. Now let's say the house has several attributes. You would go about adding an attribute just like this, add attribute, and as you see there is a shortcut, Control key A, so pressing that just adds attributes. You can edit those in place as well. Just double click and you could change them to address. An attribute needs to have a type, and the types, if we point this, is address, and the possible types are available in this picker. So let's see if we can make it not fall out the screen. And if you were to add types, well, there's a way to add your own types, but we're not going to go into that just now. These are the types that are available for you if you are going to execute your model in, let's say, turnkey. So, and of course, all the classes that you add also turn into types, but such a type, model type, isn't used as an attribute type. Then it's instead called an association. And associations are created just by picking the association mode tool and then drag between two classes like this. So noteworthy is that the class is in the package. It's not really on the diagram. The diagram is just a way to show the class. So if we were to switch the diagram back to this one, we see that since this showed the same class, it also shows the same attributes as we added many. So if I were to add even more attributes now, like that, they will be also visible on my other diagram here. This might be what you want and it might not be what you want. So what you can do is right click on a class and say features. This one has checked the show features, but we might want to decide what features that should be shown on just this diagram. So clicking that brings up this dialog feature pick form, and here we could state what mode it should be in. Show only picked, hide only picked, or hide all. Or the default is show all, of course. Show only the picked one. So the picked are empty, so if I just pick the address, it will look like that. And if I also pick the state attribute, it will look like that. That doesn't mean that these attributes aren't available. As you see in the repository, they are still there, but I have chosen to not show them on this screen. On the other screen, on the other diagram, they are still there. So this is a way to design your diagrams to focus on a single issue that you want to describe. You could also give the placed classes. These classes are placed, and this is just a class. You could give them a color, a different color than the default color. So this one is gonna have this color. That doesn't mean that this one got that color. But sometimes I want the house class to have a certain color, and then I could instead set the default color on the class. So let's pick that one to gold. This one is still this color because it's what I told it explicitly to be, but I can also see that it has the default color gold. So if I were to clear this out, I guess it would turn gold like that. So that's one way to give your model color. Yeah. Deciding what to show on the diagram. A shorthand, I said that you could right click here and say right click on the class and say features, pick show features, and then you could change what features should be shown. A shorthand for this is just standing on an attribute and pressing delete. So you might think that this would actually remove or delete the attribute from the repository, but that is not the case. What happened was really the features, show features, no, the features, pick show features has been updated to remove the ones that I'm not interested in. So delete, delete, delete. What if I actually want to delete attribute 1? Well, then I have to press Control Delete. So delete is most often just hide from view. This is the case if I were to delete this class, just having it selected and then pressing delete, and it disappeared, but it's still in the repository, so I can get it back that way. To actually remove it, again, it's Control Delete, and now it's gone. It disappeared from the repository as well. And now I can press Edit, Undo to get it back. Okay. If I drag on another class to this diagram, one that actually has a relation to the house, the relation will be shown. And I can also drag on the house one more time, like this. This is okay. The common use case for this is actually when your diagram is large and maybe a house is just a peripheral class to something that needs to be shown in various locations. So then it would be good to be able to duplicate it and show it in many places. But maybe you don't want the associations to show in this case, or at least not all associations. So let's say that we have another class and we call that street. I just selected it and started typing, and then it went into edit mode. So, and I do an association between street and house, like that. Then how come there is no association here? Well, that was because the house class came into this diagram before the street even existed. If I were to remove this with delete and add it again, then it would be there. And these are optional. You want them in view or not. And same here, you just press delete to remove them from view, and control delete to actually delete them. So if I press control delete, it will disappear both here and there, like that. And if I press undo, I will get them back. If I want to remove it from this view in this location, I just press delete, like that. And of course I can undo that as well if I want to. But let's have that deleted. And of course now this class and this class lacks the association to street in this diagram. This is of course all the same class. If I filter the repository just by typing here, I can see everything that is called house. House, the class house attribute 10. I can instead start with a dot and say attribute. Oops. Everything that matches attribute and isn't a class. What if I were to write house dot house? Then I will get all the association ends that are named house, like this. But if I write street, I see street the class and house the street association name and street the house association name. Of course these are selectable, and you can set the properties in the object inspector down here. Standing here and you have something filled in the filter search, you could press escape to clear it, and then we're back to the repository tree, and all the things are available here as well. If we want to reintroduce associations, we can right click and say introduce and remove. Here we can introduce non-placed super and subclasses. Well, this is not really the case here. Introduce pick from available. Let's see, that particular menu went off screen for you, so I'm going to do it like this. Introduce and remove. Introduce pick from available. Here it says house, but house is already on diagram, so it won't do that for me. Introduce non-placed associated classes. So if I pick this one, I got it back. Let's see. I removed it, and then I say introduce and remove, reintroduce removed associations. That's the one I was looking for. Okay, then it's back for all three. Yeah. Associations have anchor points on their classes, so it should be possible to design your diagrams. You can also grab an association and introduce via points like this. But most likely you want to use, or I often want to use the square line option. And the square line option works like this. So it always do things in 90 degrees. So if I were to do something strange, it will always do it in 90 degrees. And then we can get these artifacts where there's something really small, but it's easily removed like that. In fact, the square option, the square line, is so common. So if I click the back side here to get the diagrams properties here, I can set it to square new associations, square new associations. So if I were to create a new association on this diagram, it would be defaulted to square. There are some other options on the diagram. It says, if I click the back side, show association names. And here it's set to dim the defaults. Dim the defaults. What we mean is that this is dimmed, the street and the house, because these haven't actually been given hard names. They're just derived from what they are pointing at. You see, this is pointing at street, so it's called street. But I could actually call this something else, like the street. And then it's black instead of dimmed, like this one. This is still the default name. And I click the back side of the diagram and I get back to the property editors for the diagram, and I can show change this to show association names always even defaults, and this one is not dimmed anymore, it's hard black. Or I can show tell the diagram to not draw the defaults at all. Now it's gone. So then it's meant to be implicit. The reader of this diagram knows that this is probably called house. I like to have it on dim defaults, but this is very individual. So now I have a little model. I might want to save it. I'm going to save it to C temp demo 55, maybe, like that. When I save, I'm gonna do it like this instead, and save as, and we're gonna do a new folder, demo model. And if I save it as a modeler file, what happens then is that the model is treated as one file, and this file is actually a zip file. So if I were to rename it .zip and open it, I could see there are parts in it. Another way to save the model is to choose the eco MDL file format, and this is saved as the individual parts. So then we get all the parts, and each part of our model is well-formed XML. So if I were to open this, I would get something like this, stating what the different things in my model are. Okay. So we have looked at the association tool. You can bind things together with associations, and you can set the cardinality on association ends. And you can set it either in the property inspector, or you could just write something here, star, or 1, or 0, 0, ... 1. Okay. You see that E that pops up here, it's for embed. So normally the many side of an association, in this case this side, will actually store the key to this single object. So these many objects will all point out 0 or 1 house. And then we say that the key is, or the association is, embedded in this class. And this E is for stating where the association is embedded. But it's obvious when we have a many to one relationship where we need to embed the association. It's not obvious when we have a one-to-one. So that's why we actually write it out explicitly. But this is considered more or less an error, because it's redundant to embed the key both in house pointing out the street and both in the street pointing out the house. So we need to choose, or we should choose one that actually embeds, and remove embed from the other one. So if I select this association end and say embed false, it will be removed from here, and I know it's embedded in this end. And this end is actually owned by the house. The house has a key that is the street, so it's embedded in the house. So you always read the name in the foreign end, what you point at, like that. But I'm gonna undo. In a couple of steps like that, because in my case it feels better to know that The house has 001 street, but the street can have multiple houses. In fact, it might be a good practice to have the default name of this is now named house, but maybe it would be better to put a plural S on all the multilinks. That would make the default associations a bit more correctly language wise correct. So we can actually set the property on the package. Remember that all our classes belong to one package, and our package is package 1 in this case. And there's a property called plural suffix. So is there anything we want to append to everything that to all association ends that are many? Well, in my case, I think S would be good. So now the default name is not house anymore, it's houses. It's houses. But here we point out one house, then it's house. On the other hand, we point out multiple class 2, and then it's class 2s. Yeah, most of the time this is okay. And if it wouldn't be okay, we can simply override the name with a specific name. Okay, if I head back to my overview, I now see that I have these diagrams. When I have a lot of diagrams, I might want to focus on a little thing looking for something. I can turn on the magnifier. There's a looking glass that I can hold over the diagrams to find the details. It might be help you to locate things. This is the magnification factor. Okay, so this is the overview of all the diagrams I have, but I could also get an overview of all the classes I have. And these are the classes and their relations that are currently in my model. I could also get information if I have any view models, but I don't yet. And actions, but I don't have any of those either. And 3D view if I have these properties to help me see how things relate. This is pretty much work in progress still, so we're figuring out how to use it best. Okay. So let's see. We have touched upon the association tool. Let's just finish off the obvious toolbar icons up here. This is the generalization tool. So if there's a base class or superclass for street called location, and street is a type of location, so street is then a specialization of location. So I would take a generalization arrow and drag it from street to location, because in the direction of the arrow things get more general, and in the other end they get more specialized. So here I might introduce a property called position. I'm gonna leave that as string for now. So this means that the street actually inherits the attribute of position. It means that street has the position attribute. Okay, that was the generalization arrow. We also have the association class connection mode. And this is commonly used if you have many-to-many relationships. Like class 2, say it could have multiple houses, like this. In this case, the key is not embedded here and it's not embedded here, because there can be many class 2s and there can be many houses for each of these. So what will need to be done logically is to introduce a link class in this association. If I click the association, I have an option of picking a specific class to say that this is the association class. I can also do it by the association connection tool. So this class should be the association class. If I take this tool, select it and drag out and end up on the arrow or some place near it, I get a dotted line. And when I select this, I see that the association class is set to class 1. If I were to null it out here, the dotted line would disappear. And if I were to add it again, the dotted line will not be introduced, because that would be, it's the same as if I had removed it by hand. So I need to go here and let's move it over here so the menu doesn't go off screen. Introduce and remove, reintroduce removed associations. Now I got it, but I got it on that one instead. Yeah, that's okay. Say that. Okay, so that was those 3. This is just jumping back and forth between diagrams that you have visited before. But you can always find the diagrams like this also. The reference window is just to get a read-only copy of one of your diagrams. If you need to compare something, one diagram with another, and you want to see them side by side, it might be good to be able to have multiple diagrams on the screen at the same time. The plus and minus is just zooming, and this brings up the view model editor that we haven't talked about at all yet. We're coming to that. This brings up the action editor. We haven't talked about that either. This brings up the access groups editor. Haven't talked about that. This one actually runs through the model to check that everything seems okay. So index model and report errors. It actually checks all the expressions that we may have in our model. Like for house, for example, we might have a default string representation, and we might want to write out the address of the house whenever someone asks what the default string representation of the house is. And if we would do this by writing a small OCL, object constraint language expression. So here we are in context of house, and we would use the address, self address, like that, and then the expression is there. If we check, it's fine, but if the expression would be something different that isn't an available property, we would get an error indicator saying that the default string representation on house is not a member of house. Okay. And since this is in error, when we bring up the editor, we will also see that the address X is not a member of house. We will get back a lot to the OCL editor to find expressions that will help us in our modeling and fine-tuning what our model is about. But for now I'm gonna fix this error by removing the X, and then it's syntax okay, and the returning result type is string. Okay, and if I were to check it again, it would not report any errors. This error check is run automatically whenever I save. So if I accidentally change this and save, it will state there's an error, and I would fix the error and save, and that would be gone. This icon is the Enterprise Architect information window, the one I showed you briefly before, defining the process or the processes. So here we can add processes and how they connect to each other. We can have add entries, catalog entries that aren't really classes but are more concepts that we use our classes to fulfill. So one concept in this case might be place to live, and what implements place to live. Yeah, that would be maybe the house. And if I tie things together like this, I will get further information on my classes that the house is a place to live. So it's more detailed information. So that's the catalog entries. The actors are actors in our domain, like mailman. Home owner. And I could add a motivation for the homeowner likes to be in control. And also if there are user stories that we really need to have. As a home owner, I want to get mail to my mailbox. Later on, this could be implemented by one of the steps in our processes. So none of the process steps really fits the bill just now, so I would have to add another process. As we go deeper down, we have the applications. So what actually implements, what do I have in our enterprise that are tools for people in the enterprise to use, for the actors to use. So that's the information about that. And the applications need some kind of infrastructure. I see that this window doesn't really have a scroll bar. So these are the core concepts of the enterprise architecture information. How infrastructure relates to applications, and how applications are used in processes by actors, and how they all work on information, and how the information is tied to implemented by classes. We will see that all of these things tie together in the end, so that you will have a complete understanding and documentation of all the things that you choose to model. Okay.